I was always very lively and, among my friends. But outside of that, I'd go to a dance and sit in the corner and whatever.
James Garner refused to speak about Jack Elam for decades. No explanation after Elam died in 2003. That silence sparked one question Hollywood could never answer. What happened between them? Behind the cameras, their bond was very different from what fans believed. Garner overcame abuse and poverty to become a TV icon, while Elam, who lost an eye as a child, became known for playing Hollywood's deadliest villains. When they finally worked together, insiders noticed something unusual right away. Friends stayed silent, cast members dodged questions, and Garner never spoke about the rumors. Now, years later, the truth about their bond is emerging, revealing a side of James Garner fans never knew. The boy. Oklahoma tried to break. James Scott Bumgarner was born on April 7, 1928, in Norman, Oklahoma. The timing could not have been worse. The Great Depression was about to hit the entire country like a wall. The Oklahoma Dust Bowl was already turning farmland into nothing. Families were losing everything, and the Bumgarner household was no different. The family ran a general store at Denver Corner on the east side of Norman. They were already poor. Then things got worse. When James was only 4 or 5 years old, his mother, Mildred, died. The details Garner later shared about her death were painful and private. What is certain is that losing a mother at that age leaves a mark that never fully disappears. James and his 2 older brothers, Jack and Charles, were sent to live with different relatives after their mother passed. The family was scattered. Their father, Weldon, eventually remarried in 1934 and brought the boys back together. But that reunion was not the warm homecoming anyone would have hoped for. The new stepmother, a woman named Wilma, was physically and verbally abusive to all 3 boys. Garner later described her treatment in his 2011 memoir with blunt honesty. What she did to those boys, he wrote, would result in prison time today. At 14 years old, James physically confronted Wilma to stop the abuse. After that encounter, she left, and the marriage broke apart. For a young boy who had already lost his mother and been passed between relatives, this was just another chapter in a long series of upheavals. Weldon then moved to Los Angeles, leaving the boys behind in Norman again. James stayed in Oklahoma, worked whatever jobs he could find, and eventually dropped out of school. At 16, he lied about his age and joined the United States Merchant Marine. He liked the work and the people, but chronic seasickness forced him out after just 1 year. The next few years were a blur of different jobs. Carpet laying with his father in Los Angeles, working in chick hatcheries, oil fields, truck driving, grocery clerking. At one point, he modeled swimwear for the Janssen brand. None of it was the life he was building toward. None of it felt like the thing he was supposed to do. But it was all building something inside him. A certain toughness, a certain patience, and a certain ability to read people quickly. Skills that would one day make him one of the most natural actors Hollywood had ever seen. But before Hollywood could find James Garner had to survive a war first. 2 Purple Hearts and a borrowed career. In 1950, James Bumgarner became the first Oklahoman drafted into the United States Army for the Korean War. That fact alone tells a story, not just about Garner, but about how completely ordinary his life had been up to that point. No special treatment, no advantages, just a young man from Norman who got called up and went. Korea tested Garner in ways that the Depression, the abusive stepmother, and the scattered childhood had not. Real combat, real danger, real consequences. Garner was wounded twice on the battlefield. The first wound came from shrapnel from an enemy mortar round, hitting both his hands and face. The second wound arrived on April 24, 1951, when Garner was diving into a foxhole during a combat engagement and was struck in the lower body by friendly fire. Both injuries earned him the Purple Heart, though the second medal was not actually handed to him until a ceremony in 1983, over 30 years after the fact. Garner came home from Korea without a high school diploma, without a career plan, and without any particular direction. Working odd jobs, he ended up in Los Angeles again, eventually taking a job at a gas station. One afternoon, pulling up to the curb in front of an office building, Garner spotted a familiar face through the window, a former soda jerk named Paul Gregory, who had become a theatrical producer. Gregory offered Garner a non-speaking role in a touring Broadway production of the Caine Mutiny Court-Martial, starring the legendary Henry Fonda. That non-speaking role would change everything. Garner spent the entire production watching Fonda work, studying the way Fonda carried stillness on stage, the way Fonda told the truth without effort. The naturalistic style made Fonda seem less like an actor and more like a person. Garner absorbed every lesson. By the time the show reached Broadway, he was already internalizing what great acting actually meant. Warner Brothers signed Garner to a contract in 1956, and by 1957, the most unlikely star in television was about to be born. Because the moment Garner put on Brett Maverick's hat, the entire television Western changed overnight. The man who rewrote the Western. Before Maverick premiered on ABC in 1957, the television Western was a very serious place. Heroes were stoic. Villains were clearly evil. The good guys won every single time. Everybody wore their morality on their sleeve, and there was never much doubt about who was who. Then came Brett Maverick. Brett Maverick was a gambler, a cheat, a coward when cowardice made sense, and one of the funniest characters American television had ever seen. Garner played the role with effortless charm and a kind of wit that made audiences feel like they were in on the joke. Where other Western heroes drew their guns, Brett Maverick talked his way out. Where other characters showed raw courage, Maverick found the cleverness in a situation and used it like a weapon. Garner was not playing a hero. Garner was playing a recognizable human being, and audiences absolutely fell in love with it. Maverick ran from 1957 until Garner left the series in 1960, a departure that came after Warner Brothers stopped paying Garner during a writer's strike, claiming no scripts were available to film. Garner sued. A judge sided with him after discovering that scripts had in fact been available the entire time. Warner had simply stopped paying without legal justification. That lawsuit mattered beyond just the money. It sent a message to Hollywood that actors had rights, that studios could not simply manipulate contract terms to squeeze more out of talent. Garner was not the first actor to fight a studio, but the directness of the move and the clean victory that followed made it a landmark moment. After leaving Maverick, Garner moved into films. The Great Escape in 1963, The Americanization of Emily in 1964, Grand Prix in 1966. Each film showed a different dimension of what Garner could do, from comedy to drama to full physical performance in a racing environment where Garner did much of his own driving. The career was building into something extraordinary, but the role that would define the second half of it, the one that would cement Garner permanently in American culture, was still ahead. Before that role arrived, though, a different man entirely was already building a very different kind of legend on those same Western stages. Jack Elam, the accountant who became a villain. William Scott Elam was born on November 13, 1920, in Miami, Arizona, a small copper mining town about 85 miles east of Phoenix. Like Garner, Elam lost a parent early. His mother, Alice, died when Elam was just 4 years old, succumbing to illness after a 3-year struggle. After her death, young Jack and his older sister Mildred were passed between various family members until their father remarried in 1928. The parallels to Garner's early life are striking. Both men, years before they ever met, were shaped by the same kind of foundational loss. Elam eventually followed in his father's footsteps toward accounting, attending Santa Monica Junior College and earning qualifications as a certified public accountant. He served in the United States Navy during World War II as a supply officer. After the war, Elam worked as a bookkeeper and auditor for some of the biggest names in Hollywood, including Samuel Goldwyn himself. At one point, Elam managed the books for Hopalong Cassidy Productions. Then, something unexpected happened. The endless hours spent reading dense financial ledgers under artificial light were destroying what little vision remained in Elam's one functioning eye. The backstory of that eye is one of the most remarkable facts in Hollywood history. In 1931, when Elam was 11 years old, a fellow Boy Scout accidentally stabbed him in the left eye with a pencil during an initiation event at a Boy Scout meeting. The injury was not treated quickly enough. By the time doctors examined the eye, the lens had to be removed entirely. The eye went sightless. For about 20 years, Elam managed fine, with his right eye doing all the work. But the long hours of auditing put too much strain on that single functioning eye. Eventually, doctors told Elam the accounting career had to end completely. Elam had built relationships inside the film industry through his audit work. Using those connections, he negotiated a deal with a director who needed financing. Elam would secure the funding in exchange for acting roles. The first film was The Sundowners in 1950. Elam played a killer. The camera loved his face immediately, and the career of one of Hollywood's greatest character actors was officially born. But the path from that first villain role to the friendship of a lifetime ran through some of the most iconic westerns ever made. The face that made audiences nervous. In the 1950s and 1960s, Jack Elam became one of the most dependable bad guys in Hollywood. The drifting left eye gave every performance an unpredictable quality. Audiences could never quite read where the danger was coming from when Elam was on screen. That physical quality, which came from a childhood accident and a subsequent career in accounting, became the single most recognizable tool in Elam's performing arsenal. Elam appeared in High Noon in 1952 alongside Gary Cooper. Gunfight at the OK Corral in 1957 with Burt Lancaster and Kirk Douglas. In 1968, Sergio Leone cast Elam in the opening sequence of Once Upon a Time in the West, a film now considered one of the greatest westerns ever made. In that opening sequence, Elam shares a long, almost wordless scene with a fly inside a train station. The scene runs for several minutes. Nobody speaks. Elam simply tracks the fly, bothered by its presence, until finally catching it inside the barrel of his gun. The sequence became legendary. Critics wrote about it for decades, and Elam accomplished the whole thing without a single line of spoken text. That was the essence of what made Elam remarkable. The ability to hold an entire scene, an entire audience, using nothing but face and presence. Other actors needed dialogue to make moments land. Elam could build suspense, comedy, menace, and warmth using facial expression alone. Actor Will Hutchins, who worked alongside Elam in Sugarfoot from 1959 to 1961, described the quality precisely. Elam never showed off. Instead of showing the audience his performance, Elam let the audience discover the character themselves. That quality put Elam in demand constantly. Throughout the 1950s and 1960s, Elam appeared in Gunsmoke, The Rifleman, Bonanza, The Lone Ranger, Have Gun Will Travel, Rawhide, Cheyenne, Zorro, The Twilight Zone, and dozens more. The list reads like a complete catalog of the golden era of American television. But the biggest chapter in the Elam story had not yet started. It required a very specific co-star to unlock it. And when James Garner and Jack Elam finally shared a set together, something happened that neither of them fully expected. When the charmer met the villain. By 1969, James Garner needed a film that worked. The Rockford Files was still 5 years away. The mid-1960s films had been a mixed run. The Grand Prix had been a critical success, but box office performance was modest. The career was not in crisis, but Garner was looking for something that suited the particular way he moved through material, the comedic anti-hero instinct that Maverick had proven so perfectly. Support Your Local Sheriff gave him exactly that. The film is a Western comedy set in a gold rush town, with Garner playing a stranger who is passing through and accidentally becomes sheriff before he can move on. The script was sharp, the premise was clever, and the tone was warm without being soft. Garner was completely at home in it. And then there was Jack Elam. Elam played Jake, a dangerous outlaw who winds up locked in a jail cell that has no bars. Garner's sheriff simply draws a chalk line on the floor and tells Jake that the line is the cell wall. And Elam, with full commitment and perfect comedic timing, stays inside the chalk line. The scene became one of the most beloved comic moments in Western film history. It worked because both men played it completely straight. Garner's calm authority made the absurdity feel real. Elam's genuine physical response to the invisible wall made it hilarious without effort. Neither performer reached for the joke. The joke arrived naturally between them. That chemistry was not manufactured. Both men described on separate occasions how naturally the dynamic between them came together on set. Garner later reflected that working with a character actor of Elam's quality was a specific kind of gift. The kind where scenes improve automatically because the other person is so completely present that the whole thing stops being performance and starts feeling like something actually happening. They made Support Your Local Gunfighter in the 1971, another Western comedy with the same creative team, and the chemistry held completely. Two films, two masterclasses in how opposites create perfect balance on screen. But the story that most fans never got to hear is what that partnership looked like when the cameras stopped rolling. Off-screen, the friendship nobody fully reported. The official James Garner fan page has documented something that almost no major publication covered properly during either man's lifetime.
Jim Garner loved working with Jack Elam, and the feeling was fully mutual.
That single fact, confirmed by people who were close to both men, tells a more important story than the mystery of Garner's public silence ever did. Both men were professionals in the truest sense of the word. They showed up on time. They knew their lines. They respected the crew. In an industry full of difficult personalities and ego-driven behavior, Garner and Elam both operated by a code that prioritized the work and the people around them over personal glorification. That shared ethic created a natural trust on set. When actors trust each other, material improves. Scenes breathe differently. The improvisational quality that made the Sheriff and Gunfighter films so good came directly from two performers who felt completely safe with each other in front of the camera. Garner was known throughout his career for standing up for the people who had no power on set. Crew members, stunt people, junior cast members who were being pushed around by studio pressure or difficult directors. Multiple colleagues described Garner as someone who would use whatever weight his name carried to protect people who needed protecting, quietly and without making it about himself. Elam had a similar reputation. Described by virtually everyone who worked with him as easygoing, generous, and deeply professional off-camera, Elam was the opposite of the menacing figures he played on screen. He loved the outdoors, ranching, horses, the kind of simple pleasures that had nothing to do with Hollywood status. Two men from broken beginnings who made it to the top of a competitive and often ruthless industry and somehow kept their basic decency intact along the way. The friendship between them was real. It was grounded. And it was the kind of quiet relationship that does not generate tabloid coverage precisely because nothing dramatic was happening. They simply respected each other deeply. This makes the story of Garner's long public silence about Elam even more important to understand correctly. The silence that sparked a decade of rumors. When Jack Elam died on October 20, 2003, at age 82 in Ashland, Oregon, the cause was congestive heart failure. James Garner did not make a major public statement. No formal press statement full of warm memories. The man who had worked with Elam across 2 beloved films and shared genuine mutual respect with him simply went quiet. And in Hollywood, silence gets interpreted. Rumors started circulating almost immediately. Some entertainment publications suggested there had been tension between the two men later in their careers. Others speculated about professional jealousy. A few went further, implying that a falling out had happened at some point and that the silence was a form of cold distance rather than private grief. None of it was substantiated. None of it came from anyone who actually knew either man. It was the kind of narrative that fills a vacuum when a public figure does not speak. But here is what those rumors missed entirely. James Garner was not a man who processed grief publicly. The entire arc of his life, from losing a mother as a small child, to surviving an abusive stepmother, to 2 battlefield injuries in Korea, to decades of industry battles against studios trying to cheat him, had produced a man who handled the hardest things quietly and internally. Garner was not cold about Elam. Garner was private about everything that genuinely mattered to him. The silence was the tribute. For a man of Garner's nature, not performing grief was the most honest response available. But the world wanted words. And eventually, not long before Garner himself was gone, the words finally came. What Garner said when the silence finally broke was far simpler and more powerful than anything the rumor cycle had ever suggested. What Garner finally said. James Garner spent most of his public life avoiding sentimentality. The 2011 memoir, The Garner Files, was praised by reviewers for its directness and lack of Hollywood self-mythology. Garner wrote about his stepmother plainly, wrote about Korea plainly, wrote about the Warner Brothers lawsuit and the NBC lawsuit that followed the Rockford Files without dramatization. The book reads like a man who spent decades not talking about himself, finally agreeing to say the necessary things and nothing extra. About Elam, Garner was clear and measured. Working with Elam, Garner wrote, was one of the specific pleasures of a very long career. Elam was described as one of the most natural screen presences Garner had ever encountered. Someone whose technique was invisible because the technique had been so fully absorbed that what remained was simply a person. Garner noted that Elam could hold a scene without speaking in a way that very few performers in Hollywood history had ever managed. The scene with the chalk line, the wordless sequences, the way Elam communicated entire emotional realities using only the arrangement of his face. Garner also described Elam the way people who knew Elam personally always described him, as generous, warm, deeply professional, and entirely unlike the wild-eyed villains on screen. A man who had built a career on playing dangerous characters, while being in real life one of the most relaxed and pleasant people on any set. What comes through in Garner's words about Elam is not the language of a formal tribute designed for public consumption. There is no performance in it. Garner described Elam the way people describe someone they genuinely know, with specific details, earned affection, and the kind of honest admiration that only comes from real experience. The silence had never been about distance. It had always been about depth. But the most important part of this story is something almost nobody ever pointed out. Something that connects these two men long before they ever met. The connection nobody ever made. This is the insight that the official tributes, the YouTube summaries, and the entertainment retrospectives have consistently overlooked. James Garner and Jack Elam did not just share screen chemistry, they shared the same kind of life. Both men lost their mothers before the age of 5. Both were passed between relatives after that loss. Both grew up during periods of significant economic hardship, one in Depression-era Oklahoma, one in a small Arizona mining town. Both came to Hollywood as complete outsiders with no connections, no training, no family legacy in the industry, and no reason to expect the doors to open for them. Neither man was supposed to make it. Garner came in as a near-broke gas station worker who stumbled into a non-speaking Broadway role. Elam came in as an accountant whose failing eyesight had taken away his livelihood and left him with nothing except the relationships built in years of auditing other people's productions. Both men then built extraordinary careers without the conventional foundations. Garner became a leading man without leading man training. Elam became one of the most recognizable character actors in Hollywood history without ever attending drama school. Both did it through observation, instinct, and the kind of resilience that does not come from talent programs and conservatory training. It comes from surviving difficult childhoods. That shared foundation almost certainly shaped the unspoken understanding between them on set. When Garner described Elam as being completely present in scenes, when Elam described the work between them as natural and easy, what both men were pointing at was something more than professional compatibility. Two people who had learned early that no external structure was going to protect them, that everything had to be built from scratch by their own hands, tend to recognize each other instantly. There is a quality of groundedness in people who have survived that kind of early loss, a lack of pretension, a clear-eyed honesty about what actually matters. Garner had it. Elam had it. And when those two men stood across from each other on a set in 1969, both of them felt it. That foundation explains not just the chemistry on screen, but also the specific way Garner carried Elam's memory after he was gone. The man Garner became and the legacy Elam left. James Garner spent the years after Maverick building something unusual in Hollywood, a reputation for complete honesty and zero tolerance for exploitation. The Warner Brothers lawsuit in 1960 set a precedent. The NBC lawsuit over Rockford Files profits, which Garner also won, reinforced it. Garner fought for fair payment twice against two of the most powerful entertainment companies in the world, and won both times. Other actors took note. Crew members who worked with Garner repeatedly described the experience of being on his sets as different from other productions, because Garner used his leverage to ensure that the people around him were treated fairly. In 1963, Garner marched in the March on Washington for Civil Rights, standing in the third row as Martin Luther King delivered the most famous speech in American history. Garner did not publicize this heavily. It was simply something he believed in, so he went. That kind of consistency in how Garner treated studios, how Garner treated crew, how Garner moved through the world off camera was the same consistency that defined the friendship with Elam. Not a friendship built on shared fame or mutual promotion. A friendship built on mutual recognition of what actually mattered. Elam died in 2003, having appeared in over 200 films and television productions. The epitaph on his headstone. That epitaph tells the audience everything about who Jack Elam actually was. A man with absolutely no interest in being remembered as anything other than exactly what he was. Garner died on July 19, 2014, at age 86, at his home in Brentwood, Los Angeles. By the time Garner passed, the full picture of both lives was finally available for anyone willing to look past the surface-level story about silence and rumors. Garner and Elam trusted each other, and the films are the proof that survived both of them. And that proof is exactly why this story matters more now than it did when both men were still alive. Classic Hollywood produced a generation of performers who understood something that the current entertainment landscape has largely lost. The work itself was the point, not the personal brand, not the social media presence, not the management of public image across multiple platforms. The work, the showing up on time and knowing the lines, and trusting the person across from you enough to let something real happen between two people in front of a camera. Garner and Elam both lived by that code for their entire careers. The chalk line scene in Support Your Local Sheriff gets referenced in film school discussions of physical comedy. The opening of Once Upon a Time in the West with Elam and the Fly, appears in lists of the greatest single sequences in the history of the Western genre. The Rockford Files is still watched by new audiences who were not born when it aired. The work lasted, as it always does when the work is done honestly. James Garner was never going to give the world a tearful tribute to Jack Elam. That was not who James Garner was. What Garner gave instead was a direct and honest account when he was finally ready to give it, in his own words, at his own time, with the precision of a man who had been thinking about exactly what to say for a decade. The words were simple. The respect behind them was enormous, and no rumor cycle ever came close to understanding either one. James Garner and Jack Elam were two men who lost everything early, built everything themselves, and never once forgot where they came from. That is the real story underneath the silence. If this video changed how the story is seen, drop a comment below. Like this video and subscribe for more untold stories from classic Hollywood. The ones that go deeper than the headlines and actually get it right. See you in the next one.